We have yet another oil leak to chase on the R129. This time, it appears to be the tail shaft seal on the back of the transmission where it hooks up to the drive shaft. I guess you might also call this the rear output seal. It's basically impossible to see right now, but if you were to look forward to the drive shaft, there would be the yoke coming out of the transmission, and there's a seal there that keeps all your oil from puking out. Now this one, what tends to happen is I'll drive the car for a while, come back, and then, I don't know, over the course of a couple hours or overnight, it'll drip down a decent amount. So I'm going to need to take care of that. I did try using AT205 reseal. It worked for a short while, but ultimately it just started leaking again and worse. So yeah, no simple workarounds for this one. So you'll need a new replacement seal, a new nut, and most likely a new flex disc. I've been calling it the Guibo, but officially it's known as like a drive shaft flex disc. There's one on the transmission side, one on the differential side. The one on my differential seemed fine, but the one on the transmission was worn out. They start to crack around here and lose their integrity. So you'll most likely need to replace this as well. My plan of attack here is going to involve first dropping those two exhaust heat shields, kind of like how I did the differential, and then disconnect the drive shaft both at the differential end and at the output of the transmission. And with those exhaust heat shields removed, unbolt the center support bearing, and then drop the drive shaft out and back that way. And that should give me access to the yoke and the seal on the back of the transmission. And I imagine I'm going to be removing this center reinforcement plate, and because of that, I'm going to be putting a nice large block of wood or two on a jack to support the transmission. And then hopefully it won't be too much of a pain. Your first step is going to be removing the 8 bolts holding this heat shield. And then 2 of those are actually part of this exhaust hanger. And then there's one 8mm bolt on each side that connect the 2 exhaust heat shield pieces together. There's the other one. I had to use a swivel, but for sure a 1/4-inch ratchet to be able to get at those 2. Then remove the 2 8mm bolts holding the front of the heat shield to the car. There's one, already taken them out. And then you can move this thing to get access to the 2 8mm bolts connecting the 2 heat shields together, so you can pull them out separately, because otherwise they're kind of blocked by this exhaust, and we really don't want to go to the trouble of taking off this exhaust. Alright, so what I'm trying to do is just remove this section of the exhaust heat shield by first sliding that one all the way back and then kind of shimmying this one out towards the driver's side. And who knows, I may come to regret this due to being a tight fit, but if I don't have to drop this exhaust, it'll still be so much easier. Okay, well, with enough shimmying, I got that heat shield out. Now it's probably going to be a bear to get that back in there, but I still feel like it's going to be easier than working with that exhaust, because that was a real pain when I did the differential. So yeah, then we got the 2 bolts on the center support. Now, I see people mark these to preserve the position, but like the service manual just says bolt up the drive shaft at bolt ends and then tighten down your center support bearing. And I did that last time and I didn't have any issue. So that's what I'm going to do. We've removed both 13mm bolts that hold the center support bearing on the drive shaft. Now I've got the transmission supported with a block of wood, so I can remove this cross member and the transmission mount and then get access to the front nuts and bolts for the drive shaft and guibo on the back of the transmission. We have this transmission mount, and there's 2 15mm bolts there and then 2 13s there. I'm going to take those first. Okay, we've got our transmission mount removed from the cross member. Now we're going to use a 17mm socket to remove the 4 bolts holding the cross member onto the car. Now with the cross member out, we can finally really start to see where that oil would be coming down when the seal on the output shaft of the transmission leaks. And it just comes down, gets on that piece, and it also gets into the center of the cross member and just drains right out. We're going to put the car in neutral and make it so the nut and bolt for the drive shaft is right about here, and I can get access to it with a wrench and just spin it around and do each one until we can disconnect it. And for reference, when switching between park and neutral while working on the car, I just have the key in the ignition turned to the first position, put my foot on the brake, and that will allow you to move the gears as needed while working on the car. These are 19mm nuts and bolts. I got the car in neutral, which allows me to spin the drive shaft so I can line up my wrenches to hold the nut and spin the bolt. Now arguably a heavy duty impact would be good here. Might be kind of tough to get in though, so I'm doing it old school with a 19mm combo wrench holding the nut, bracing against the transmission right there, and then I had to use my leg and press on that breaker bar to break free the nut and bolt. So I'm doing things old school because that's what I got, and it's working. Drive shaft is popped out of the guibo, but it's still not going to come down. It's not going to come down much to get out of the way to work. And I just noticed there's this little plate essentially blocking it from coming down much more than it is to get it out of the way. But that looks a lot harder to reach those bolts without moving this exhaust. So yeah, I think I'm just going to unbolt from the drive shaft from the differential, since I've already done it once. And that stuff's easily accessible. And then that should allow me to move the drive shaft back that way, hopefully enough to make it easy to work with the transmission. All right, so we got our drive shaft moved back far enough that we've opened up the area to get that guibo and the yoke on the transmission, and finally the seal, and it's just kind of poking out right there after a little wiggling and all that good stuff. So far I've been able to avoid removing this damned exhaust, which is the number one thing I wanted to avoid. It is such a pain to deal with. So yeah, next step is going to be removing those nuts and bolts holding the guibo to the yoke. And if you're wondering, these are 19mm nuts and bolts holding the guibo to the yoke. And interestingly enough, the washer, unless someone messed with this, but the washer on these ones is on the bolt side, whereas the nut and bolt holding the drive shaft to the guibo, the nut was on the washer was on the side with the nut. So I guess that's probably due to the design of the guibo. But anyway, just wanted to point that out. At last, we have a view of our yoke, and well, yeah, definitely that seal, that output shaft seal was leaking. I mean, just look at that. So now we gotta take off the nut holding the yoke and then pull the yoke off, and then finally we got access to our rear seal. I'll tell you what was concerning. This 12-point nut holding the yoke on, not even really finger tight. I mean, I just barely touched it and it started spinning loose. So I'm wondering what the hell happened here. Did they replace the seal at some point and not tighten this, or is this just something that happened to this old thing after all these years? Concerning, to say the least, because if this came loose and allowed this thing to back out with the drive shaft, oh dear. Anyway, so I thought I was gonna have to get an impact gun up there just to, you know, loosen this thing, but no, that just came off, and the yoke is gonna come with it, I'm guessing, like that, something like that. Anyway, let me pry that off. Okay, that yoke is off. There's our seal. Now the fun part, take this off without damaging the mating surfaces. But honestly, I think that thing's gonna come out pretty easy. Alright, so we got her cleaned up. Now we gotta devise a method to pop that out of there without damaging our precious mating surfaces. To get the seal out, I purchased this 2-piece seal puller set from Harbor Freight, around 10 bucks. Alright, so we're trying this angle first, we'll see. Hopefully don't just rip this thing to shreds. Yeah, hopefully you can see the edge kind of to the left has popped out, and I just hooked it and just kind of gave this kind of back and forth, just kind of a little bit, just kind of nudging it, and then poof, popped loose. And just like that, with minimal drama, seal is out. You can see where I was prying there. But there you can see where the seal goes in. Okay, new seal is in. It's not a super tight fitting seal, so I found it was easier just to kind of like get it started by hand and get it even, and then just tapping around the edges. We've now installed the yoke / output flange onto the spline shaft of the transmission, and I've already screwed down the 12-point 30mm nut with the impact gun. Next, I'm going to use the torque wrench to ensure that it is torqued down to 200 Newton meters or 147.5 foot-pounds. I use this Milwaukee 1/2-inch impact gun at its max torque setting, which goes up to 250. I, for the life of me, could not position the torque wrench in such a way that it would stay in place and allow me to leverage it while either under the car with my arms or trying to like hold it and press it with my foot. So yes, I did not use a torque wrench, but I used an impact gun that goes way over the specified torque and gave it a few zaps with that before staking it, and if that don't hold it, nothing will. You can see now that I've staked the nut carefully into that groove. That plus the high torque of tightening this nut down should ensure that this never spins loose. And for reference, to do the staking, I used like a 3-pound metal sledge, and I believe this is like a 1/4-inch punch. I wanted something with a big wide tip so that it didn't slip when I actually struck it with the hammer from below. This ensures that you get that shoulder of that nut fully seated into the little divot. Now it's time to install our drive shaft flex disc / guibo back onto the output flange there. And there's two sides of this. One side is this one with all kinds of like the part number, the trademarks. And then there's the side, at least on mine, where it just says made in Germany. This is the OEM part. And the side with your part numbers and trademarks and stuff goes towards the front of the car. And then the side with just like your made in Germany mark goes towards the rear of the car. And these sleeves or pegs fit into the holes, those three holes there on your output flange and yoke. Next, you'll be tightening the nut and bolts holding the flex disc to the output flange. And as I mentioned earlier, you want the washers to be on the bolt side for these ones. And these are tightened down to 60 Newton meters or about 44 foot-pounds. All right, next we tightened the bolts and nuts mounting the drive shaft to the flex disc. And on these, the washer goes on the nut side, not on the bolt side. And again, I'm tightening these down to 60 Newton meters or 44 foot-pounds. Next, you bolt the drive shaft back up to the differential, put the washers on the nut side, and tighten them down to 60 Newton meters or 44 foot-pounds. Okay, so after getting your engine mount secured, you're going to be putting that cross member back on. Now what I did first is install these two bolts, which go into this engine mount. And be careful because that is aluminum. So you're threading into aluminum, don't go hog wild. And then you have these four bolts which go into the actual car body frame. And for all of these, there's no torque spec indicated. So use the old Guten tight in German, or in my case, a 1/2-inch breaker bar, and you should be fine. And then we can take the jack out of the way since this thing is supported again by the car. Next, we're securing the center support back into the car. And there's these little, we'll call them keys. Grab this one. And they go into the car like this. There's a slot right there. And then another one right there. One on each side. And so you slip it in, and then your bolt, of course, goes through the holes and screws in. These use like a self-centering type of bolt. See that tip? It's like a self-centering thing. But you want to do this step after you get your drive shaft and everything else kind of bolted up and essentially in position so that, you know, the bearing is kind of conforming to the configuration of everything else. The torque spec on these is 30 Newton meters or 22 foot-pounds. And probably the part of the job I'm looking forward to least is maneuvering that exhaust heat shield back up here. But we're going to try and come in from that side and shimmy it in, just like how we got it out. And then finally, we have the bolts holding that heat shield onto the car as well. Okay, well that wasn't too bad. This heat shield slipped in from this side, slid it that way, and it slid right into place. And then I connected the two halves while this whole thing was still loose. Those two bolts right there are kind of hard to get to unless you're assembling the two heat shields together first. And then installed the bolts for that heat shield. And then finally these little bastards. And now we're done. Seal is replaced. Cleaned up the underside. Now we just pick up the mess of tools we had to pull out for this project. lower the car, and well, hopefully we have a sealed up transmission and we won't be pissing ATF all over the floor. We'll see though. You know how car repairs go at home. So yeah, after, we'll say 30 miles, no sign of any leakage. She's doing great. Not a drop is coming out of that transmission. I even checked it overnight. So we, once again, are 5x5 with this beautiful SL500.